Canada has had to remove 41 of its diplomats from India after our nation decided to downsize the Canadian mission. Justin Trudeau has cried foul about the decision, calling it a violation of the Vienna Convention. Well, a reading of the convention tells you that it's not. But India has made now serious counter-allegations against Canada and its envoys. India's External Affairs Minister has said that India invoked diplomatic parity for Canada because of concerns about continuous interference in India's affairs by Canadian personnel. Let's first listen in to what our External Affairs Minister had to say.
Going through a difficult phase, but I do want to say it's the problems we have are with a certain segment of Canadian politics and the policies which flow from that. So I want people to understand, in a sense, the extent of the issue. Number two, right now, the big concern which people have is on visas. Some weeks ago, we stopped issuing visas in Canada because it was no longer safe for our diplomats to go to work to issue visas. So their safety and security was the primary reason we had to temporarily stop the issue of visas.
All right. While India says the actions of the Canadian personnel will come out with time and the world will understand why the presence of Canadian envoys made India uncomfortable, the reality of the actions of the Canadian government in the past are not hidden. They show how a dangerous precedent for harboring Khalistani terrorism in fact goes back to the times of Pierre Trudeau, former Prime Minister of Canada, and guess what? Father of who? Canada's current Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau. Since a month now, NewsX has brought its viewers a global expose on the absolutely shoddy and shady job done by the Canadian government and intelligence forces under Pierre Trudeau to hold the masterminds of the Kanishka bombing accountable. Canada under Pierre Trudeau failed completely to bring the perpetrators of Canada's worst ever terrorist attack to justice. 268 Canadian citizens lost their lives in 1985 when a bomb exploded on board Air India Flight 182. NewsX has put out the inquiry report commissioned by the Canadian government called the Justice John Major Report, released in 2010. NewsX has also put out for the first time ever for the world the Justice B.N. Kirpal report commissioned by the Indian government, released in 1986. Both reports make one thing absolutely clear. There were people within the Canadian government that did not want to stop or punish the Kanishka bombing Khalistani terrorists. The Canadian government commissioned report, which is readily available online, says the Kanishka bombing was a Canada-made disaster. The report makes it clear that despite all possible intel, Canadian intelligence agencies failed to not only stop the bomb, but the Canadian government failed to jail the Khalistani terrorists. We now take the next 1 hour to refresh our memories about the shocking revelations of the Kanishka files, as we now put out a demand that the Kanishka files must be reopened. I quickly bring in, on that note, our panelists who we have with us on the broadcast. I have with me Mr. Sanjay Lazar. His father was a member of the crew on Air India Flight 182. Ambassador Pradeep Kapoor, Mr. Harinder Sikka, Pathikrit Payne and Professor Madhav Nalapat with us on the broadcast. Mr. Lazar, let me begin with you. Before I go into some of the details of the several documents that we at NewsX have read over the past couple of months, before we get into that, I would just like to understand from you, you lost your entire family in that tragedy.
Yes, I did.
Would you want the Canadian government, sir, to reopen the case?
Ma'am, first of all, before I start, I'd like to make two corrections. A, I lost my entire family, my father, my mother, and my baby sister. Number two, there were 329 people that passed away and not 285 who were bombed. It was 331.
Right. So, my apologies for that. Yes, you're right. All I meant was 268 Canadian citizens, because the Canadian government does not even want to acknowledge that.
Let's come to the point that you asked about reopening the inquiry. Ma'am, I was one of those people that I was a kid when this happened, and I lobbied very fiercely along with other families, victims' families, for up to 20 years. I attended the criminal trial in Vancouver. I sat not more than 15 feet from Bagri and Malik during the trial. I watched them smirk at us. I watched them being found innocent or not guilty of the crimes, though there was insurmountable evidence against them. It broke our hearts. We then lobbied and we got the Justice John Major Commission appointed through Stephen Harper, who was then the Prime Minister of Canada. What is more important, ma'am, is the months before that. The Indian High Commission and the Indian External Affairs Ministry had sent no less than 30 aid memoirs. Ma'am, I don't know if you know what an aid memoir is. The ambassador is here. He will educate us. I've spoken to consular officials. I've spoken to in the course of my research for my book, and warnings from the Indian government that there was going to be an attack on a significant Indian resource, which would either be Air India, State Bank of India, or the consular officials. I have spoken to Mr. Fabian, who was himself a consular official at the time in Canada and was personally attacked by them. Not once, 2 or 3 times. The Prime Minister of Canada has written an apology. All this was before the attack. I will go further to tell you that the FBI and the Secret Service came into Toronto and to Vancouver when Mr. Gandhi, Prime Minister Gandhi, was visiting the United States, about to make sure there was no Khalistani threat to his life. And that was in June of 1985, 20 days before my family got killed in that bombing. So first of all, let's be very, very clear. There was colossal neglect by that government. Our country, our government, our people tried to, warn everybody, and even the Americans did at that stage. No one did anything. The bombing took place. We struggled for 20 years to get that inquiry. If you go through the inquiry, ma'am, the first thing is the criminal investigation. The judgment was because the tapes were wiped clean. They had surveillance on Talvinder Parmar, they had surveillance on Rayat, they had surveillance on Bagri. They had tape recorded conversations of these guys. Not for 1 day or 2 days, 168 hours of tape was wiped clean by Canadian intelligence forces. That is why the transcripts were there, but we can't use transcripts to convict in a court of law. So that was one part. Who's going to answer to that? You will reopen a John Major inquiry? Yes. Justice John Major has done a fantastic job. I was one of them that testified. I had individual independent standing, which was paid for by the government and of Canada. I flew there. I spent a long time there, and the report was satisfactory in many regards. But has Canada acted on it? No. Look at it. Look at the situation today. What are we seeing? Look at Prime Minister Trudeau. What our External Affairs Minister is saying is bang on, is absolutely right. And I absolutely support everything that our government has done. If our diplomats cannot be safe in that country, how can our citizens be safe in that country? How can our students be safe in that country? I have young kids who are also studying. I dread to think if they had to go through this. And let me make this very clear at the start of the program. These are not Sikhs. The Sikhs are a wonderful race, and they're the most successful body of people in the country, in India. And these are terrorists. These are radicals. Yes, of course, we'd like it reopened. Thank you.
Mr. Azhar, just, before I bring in the other panelists as well, you said that, of course, you were a part of the entire trial that took place in Canada. If you can just shed some more light on that for our viewers, since you have first-hand experience of how the Canadian government, first, of course, as you've pointed out very correctly, in the Justice John Major report, in Volume 2, which we've read very carefully here at NewsX as well, there is a series of incidents that lead up to the bombing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Intel report after Intel report given to the Canadian intelligence, given to the Canadian police, and they've just not bothered with anything. Talvinder Parmar comes back to Canada. He's wanted in India. Germany sends him back to Canada, and then they start tracking this man only 8 months after he's been in Canada. Then he's managed to go 20 days before the bomb blast to Duncan in British Columbia. He's conducted a trial blast there, and all of this, all the details are there in the report. They've conducted a trial blast, and the Canadian intelligence officers have written it off as a gunshot.
Gunshot. Yes.
So I just like to understand from you, what exactly was happening, sir?
Ma'am, I'd like to compliment you and your channel. I think in all these years, you're probably the first channel that has gone so deep into reading the report. You know, I tell you, there are a number of people who've not even bothered to read it. That's part one. Yes, you're right. There are two parts to this. The first part is the criminal trial. Now, you know, we're Indians, so I'll speak from an Indian standpoint. The judge was Justice Josephson, a Canadian Caucasian, and we're talking about 2005. Now, please remember that 85 to 2005 is 20 years. The RCMP and the others did nothing during that period. They said they were investigating. But there was a lady who came forward. I'm only touching one witness, not the others. And she said she was having a relationship with one of them. And she is on witness protection. And if you read the transcripts, she is known as Mrs. D.
Yes.
Mrs. D says and admits that they confessed to bombing the aircraft. They confessed to buying the tickets. They confessed to meeting XYZ. And the judge says, if he's done so much and she's admitting this on the stand, how can she still say that she loves him and respects him? Now, it's very difficult for a white-skinned person to understand what an Indian ethos is. You know, you hear, you know, families get bound together once and they stay together. If there is a relationship, obviously this lady cared more deeper than that for Mr. Malik at that time. And he couldn't accept that both could be the truth. So he found her a liar. And that's why that witness testimony was wiped out. Had that been on record, these two would have been in jail for life for 331 counts of murder. But they weren't. They walked scot-free. As far as the investigation goes, or the surveillance, this is the pre-bombing surveillance. The pre-bombing surveillance, actually, ma'am, I'll take you 10 months before. Mrs. Gandhi was assassinated on the 31st of October.
Yes.
And there was, of course, the tragic Sikh pogrom, which should never have happened. You know, it's devastating to all of us. After that, the Khalistani Commando Force gives a statement that they're going to blow up or attack an Indian aircraft. Very few people realize in the middle of November of 1984, an Air India aircraft was hijacked and it traveled to Maldives with two Sikh separatists on board. Khalistani, let me use the correct word, they were Khalistani separatists. And it travels to Maldives and then they refuel and go to Seychelles. And that is the time it was part of Talvinder Parmar's setup. They surrendered and they were found guilty in Delhi in the courts, and they died in jail actually. But that should have sent warning bells to the whole world that this is what these people are about to do. They started tracking these guys in December of 1984 in Vancouver, British Columbia. They tracked them to Duncan, you're right. They tracked their recordings. They tracked them to a meet of the World Sikh Organization, which was one of their groups in California, as well as in New York, a little before Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi was to come. They have recordings in the US of people saying that, we don't care how many go down, but we're going to take these people down so that the Indian government will come down on their knees. Now, these are not light statements,
Yes.
They've got recordings, they've got photographs of all the officers. The officers have photographs of both the RCMP and the CSIS surveilling all the three guys' houses. And yet, and all these photographs are available on the net even today. And yet not one of them raises alarm bells. They keep sending the recordings to the head office. The head office listens to it, gets it translated, because a lot of the conversation, I think, was in Punjabi. And they just write it down and they let it go and they burn the tapes. They put it in an incinerator and take it out, where it just gets flash burnt. Now, none of this was being relayed, or it was being relayed and no one was concerned. There was also a very vicious rumor at the time that there was a mole. And that's why nobody, the Canadians had a mole in that setup, and that's why they didn't want it out. But be that as it may, it's reached this stage and you couldn't convict them in a criminal trial. There is double jeopardy, of course. As we all know, you can't try the same people for the same crime a second time.
Yes.
In any system, in any country also. You had the John Major inquiry. You had a report, lessons learned from Bob Rae, who was also the Premier of Ontario. Ma'am, even today, they are not even adhering. There is terrorist funding going on. These guys are trying to take over gurdwaras. They are threatening people. And there is actually mayhem in some parts of Canada, in BC. Canada has become a soft state. Simple. That's all, I would do.
Okay, Mr. Azhar, I'll come back to you in just a moment. Let me bring in Professor Nalapat as well into the conversation. Professor Nalapat, I'd just like to understand from you, sir, and you've heard Sanjay Azhar, he's literally been there for the trial. He's lost his entire family in the bomb blast. He's been there as a young kid, part of that trial, and today, many years later, he's with us to explain what a job, what a pathetic job the Canadian government, Canadian intelligence agencies and the Canadian justice system did back in the day. A lot of people continue to ask this question: why would you demand the reopening of the Kanishka files? I'd like for you, sir, to answer that question for the people. Why is it important for us to look at what Canada did 30 years ago for us to understand what they could possibly be doing today? Is it a repetition of history?
Yes, Devika, let me say that first of all, I congratulate Mr. Lazar for the persistence with which he has sought justice. And the sad truth is, there has been no justice so far. And those who committed this heinous act have escaped. Now, the point is that this is really amazing that important tapes are just wiped clean. And there is no accountability as to who wiped them clean. Obviously, there were individuals in the Canadian investigative agencies and in the Canadian Secret Service who basically sympathized with these terrorists and who basically, were promoting their goals. And these people would have protected them by wiping this out. And of course, as for the judge is seems to be, in the face of all this evidence, in the face of so many people who have perished, including Canadian citizens, he just dismisses a case like this. Now, the question is, is it because I would only like to say that, this is amazing, quite frankly, that this could happen. And the reality is, it's happening even now. It's happening in the Canada of today. And what is happening is that China, for example, you talked about Vancouver. I am told that the station chief of operations against the United States of the Chinese Secret Service is stationed in Vancouver. He doesn't want to be stationed in the United States, but Canada is safe. And unfortunately, British Columbia is a safe zone for the ISI and for the Chinese Secret Service. So, anybody who's opposed to the ISI, anybody who's opposed to the Chinese Secret Service, woe betide them. It's institutions have been captured, individuals in institutions have been captured, and this has gone on for decades. Why? Under this false flag that this is so-called a freedom movement. This is a terror movement. Let me tell you one thing. As has correctly been said by Mr. Lazar, these people don't represent the Sikh community at all. But Mr. Lazar, I have also done some research into this. Their motivation is money. And thanks to the control of the drug trade by the ISI, the drug trade from Afghanistan, the Golden Crescent, all that, they have been flushed with money. And basically, these were mercenaries. And they took on this ideology gifted to them by the ISI. So essentially, they were servants of the ISI, servants of the Pakistan military, working for money. They were not working for any ideology except money. And this is the problem. The question is, were only those who are known Khalistanis working, or were there others in the Canadian establishment who may not be of Indian ancestry or Indian ethnicity? Were they also similarly motivated to work for this kind of terror activity? Because I again repeat, Devika, British Columbia is considered to be a safe zone of the Canadian Secret Service and the ISI. It cannot be a safe zone. And may I say that the performance of the court in this particular instance is really something that needs a looking into by the justice system, by the Canadian justice system. But I'd only like to say that unfortunately, these individuals are not the only ones. And unfortunately, the tentacles of the power of the PRC and the tentacles of the power of the money that the narcotics mafia has, those tentacles have reached deep and wide into Canada. And we are seeing this play out in real time in the denial of justice to more than 200 Canadian citizens who perished in that terror attack.
Absolutely. Ambassador Pradeep Kapoor, now Canada under Justin Trudeau will obviously never, ever reopen the Kanishka files. They'll never even talk about it. They'll probably not even acknowledge it. They're happy if the world forgets. We, of course, play our part in ensuring that the world never forgets. But given that Canada is unlikely to, under at least Justin Trudeau, ever reopen the case and bring a sense of closure and justice to the victims, what really then becomes the way forward, sir?
Thank you, Devika, and thank you to NewsX for keeping this issue, open, discussing this issue, and getting the attention of the world onto this issue. And thank you for bringing a person like Sanjay Lazar. Our compliments to you, our condolences, our sympathies for all that you have gone through. And the way you have presented it, it is an eye-opener for a lot of people. Now, first of all, I want to say that we do not have to call them Sikhs in the first instance, as some of the other panelists have pointed out. But I think we do not even need to call them out as Khalistanis, because they're Canadian citizens. So we have to call them Canadian terrorists. Once this nomenclature starts getting used all over the world, that they are Canadian terrorists who are Canadian citizens, then the focus shifts away automatically from the Sikh community, which is such a proud and brave community. That is the first aspect. The second aspect which I want to talk about is that I have had some very unsavory sort of interactions with the father of the current Prime Minister, Pierre Trudeau. When I was the Deputy Secretary Americas in the Ministry of External Affairs in Delhi, and something very strange happened, which can never happen at the level of a Prime Minister of a country in front of a foreign diplomat. And he walked in absolutely without any clothes into a meeting in a suite where I was present. This is the first time I'm making this statement on a public channel. The High Commissioner of Canada to India was present, and some of the senior Canadian officials were present in the room at that time, and it was a very big shock to me. I was traumatized. It took me a few minutes to come back into my senses to take a record of the meeting. Now, seeing a father like that, it is easier for me to understand the son's actions. What happens to the Indian diplomats in Canada? For any government in the world to allow posters which say wanted, and the faces of the people wanted are what? Senior Indian diplomats, the High Commissioner of India to Canada, the Consul General of India in Toronto, and other diplomats, and their names are highlighted, their details are highlighted. So for a government in this day and age, anywhere in the world, to do that is a most shameful thing. It's an incitement, it's an instigation. And to allow that is supportive of that act. Now for the diplomats to be exposed in this way, where they can be targets of violence, for any country, a developing country, a third world country, if they do that, the whole Western world would sort of come up in arms against it. But Canada doing it, I am shocked that no Western country is talking about it, and very few countries are even highlighting this fact. For the Hindus to be continuously sort of put as targets is another big shame. And people like Sanjay Lazar are doing a great job. Sanjay, I think you have to continue this great effort you're making, and get all the support of all the people in the world to highlight this case, because it is not a thing of the past. It is a thing of the present. It is a thing of the future. Now, China being present in Vancouver, in British Columbia, as Professor Madhav Nalapat mentioned, it's the Canadian intelligence, the Chinese intelligence, supported by ISI, which has spread its tentacles. And for Canada to say that, oh, they will support us in the case of opioid, in the case of fentanyl, and what a strange statement. For a genuine demand of not getting flooded by fentanyl, to say that we are helping them do all these actions in our soil, allowing the Chinese police to operate on Chinese police officers and others, to operate on Canadian soil, to harass and torture and traumatize Chinese citizens who have fled that regime. So I find things so strange. I mean, for me, Canada is a modern day Pakistan, and that is the equation which has to be brought out in front of the world and in front of the Western world. And India has to insist with all the Five Eyes partners, with the G7 countries, with the G20 countries, that they have to join in the effort to name and shame Canada. Nothing short of that. Thank you, Devika. Back to you.
Bringing Mr. Harinder Sikka into the conversation, I'm going to put this poster out on our screens that I have on my touchpad here. Mr. Sikka, I'm showing this photograph of the billboard that was put out in Canada, in British Columbia, as per reports. First, of course, it said assassination wanted, with big photographs of our diplomats. There was another one that said an assassination wanted for our Prime Minister as well as the External Affairs Minister. I'm not sure if Justin Trudeau has read his history. He doesn't understand that Khalistani is putting out these posters against India's Prime Minister and External Affairs Minister could possibly mean something, because we've had a Prime Minister who's been assassinated in the past. But on this poster is a photograph of Talvinder Singh Parmar, and it says Shaheed Talvinder Singh Parmar, 1992. This is the man who was responsible for the Kanishka bombing. He was a mastermind of the Kanishka bombing, and they're allowing these sort of posters to be put outside Gurdwaras in Canada. This really must hurt the Sikh community, I feel, when you watch that this is what they're allowing the Gurdwaras to now be doing in Canada.
I would like to repeat what my other fellow friends have said, that NewsX, hats off to you. Starting with that, I can't see what posters are you putting up. That's not appearing on the screen. But nevertheless, I take a very serious objection to the word Khalistan. Khalis means pure. And these people are far from being pure.
Quite right.
And they are not only misusing, abusing the word Khalis, they also are abusing Sikhs.
Yes.
Sikhs are not traitors, terrorists. These are terrorists. By wearing a turban, if you could have become a Sikh, I'll show you thousands of them in Punjab on drugs and call themselves Sikhs. I'll show you some people who loot Harimandir Sahib to start with, and they call themselves Sikhs. So let's stick to that fact that Sikhs are A, die-hard patriots. B, they do not associate with anything which is traitors or unpatriotic thing. Second thing, I was listening to Mr. Lazar for a long time, and it was an eye-opener what he said. What we need to understand, where are the problems and what are the solutions? The problems are very simple. That they are being funded lock, stock and barrel, now ever so more than before. How? Suppose you're catching once in a week a drone that lands up in Punjab or it is shot down in Punjab. The fact is that out of the 100, maybe more drones that visit Punjab from across the border, almost 90% of them get away, maybe more. That means that kind of drug money is coming into Punjab. And how does that money get back to Punjab, to Pakistan, to Canada? Very simple. Send it to any Gurdwara. There's no accountability thereafter. Is this happening? Is Aam Aadmi party to this kind of a thing is happening with these traitors? I would not use the word Khalistanis.
Right.
From today onwards. Is it happening? If that's so, then there's tons of money available to them on a regular basis from Pakistan route, from the transparent porous borders, and this needs to be stopped post haste. The government is doing, the central government is doing its best, but drones, they come like flies and then they go back and so on and so forth. But the fact is that we are catching 1, 2, 3, 4 in a week or something, or 10 in a month or whatever they're doing. I do not know the exact numbers. This is a very, very serious situation on our hand. Point number 2, I guarantee you, Canadian people have nothing to do with these traitors and terrorists. Very simple people, wonderful souls. Why then John Trudeau? It's petty politics. His father was interested in using the help of people in Brampton and British Columbia. Now today they have put up a poster that this is a Khalistani land in a place called Brampton, where 4 lakh odd people are there. So that vote counts. But I can guarantee you again that given a lot of research one has done with the people over there the past few months, talking to them because I have a lot of friends down there, they are hating themselves to be associated with such people. So to insult us, calling Khalistanis and the other people when we go anywhere overseas, first people look at us and say, possibly Khalistanis. This is not on. This is something which we are unable to digest, unable to tolerate, and we feel that Canada is heading very, very rapidly the Lebanon way. And that Canadians should be more worried. We'll take care of ourselves. We have seen plenty of enemies. We have seen Mughals, we have seen British, and we have seen Nehru Gandhi family. We have seen all of them pass away. India and Bharat has stood together, and like how. But to say that we are part of those traitors, it is wrong, it is unfortunate. Second thing, Justin Trudeau must understand his reputation in the Western world, in Europe, in his own country, is ever so low like never before. In European Parliament, he was called by names in the open domain, and he was ridiculed over there. Spare your presence, spare us your presence. Those kind of words, we are not needed here. In India, we had that slogan, General Dyer, go back.
Yes.
We had that slogan equivalent over there. What are you gaining, Justin Trudeau? You are bringing a bad, worse name to Canada, which does not deserve it. I've interacted with some of the finest diplomats, like former High Commissioner to Canada, to India, Lucy Edwards. That lady was a masterpiece who built India-Canada relationship like never before. And I'm sure that there are plenty of others who have done equally good job. But this kind of behavior, this kind of childish, are you on drugs, Justin Trudeau? I want to know. Because your country anyways is now becoming Mecca of this kind of a business.
Absolutely.
I'm requesting Canada, those people you are harboring today, they're going to be your future. Take it or lump it.
Okay, I'm going to bring in Pathikrit as well. Pathikrit, pertinent points that are raised by all of the former speakers before you. I'd just like to understand from you, Pathikrit, the fact that Canada under Justin Trudeau's father managed to bung up what would have been a straightforward and an absolutely clear investigation, given the sort of intel their own agencies had. It's not even that India was supplying. You know, like I said, just Talvinder Parmar comes to Canada. The Canadian intelligence agencies were the ones, as per the Justice John Major report, they were the ones that raised an alarm and said that, okay, this man is dodgy. He is actually capable of inciting Sikhs. Then there is a lot of red tapeism that delays a surveillance warrant against him. There is a June 1st telex that was shared by Air India saying that there's a possibility of a bombing. In November 1984, there is communication by two independent sources to Canadian intelligence agencies saying that there is a possibility of a bombing. On 4th of June 1985, there's a Duncan blast that takes place, a trial blast where two Canadian intelligence officers were literally trailing Talvinder Parmar and the other mastermind Rayat into a forest land where they hear a loud explosion, they write it off as a gunshot, and then they get some sort of communication that, okay, you can stop trailing him now. He's not a problem. So much has happened, and I'm stopping here. If I could go on about this for hours, the sort of loopholes they deliberately, now it seems, overlooked at that point in time. Do you think then under Justin Trudeau anything would have possibly changed?
Devika, first of all, are we at Canada's immediate neighbor, which is United States, the most powerful country on earth, are we to believe what you are saying and what has been discussed for so many days that US was not aware of these things? The tragedy is not just about what happened in 1985. The tragedy, Devika, is also that for last 38 years, very few people know about the kind of trauma and the kind of personal loss people like Sanjay ji went through. The tragedy is that. And the tragedy is that every year, 9/11 is commemorated, throughout the world. People pay homage, which is fine. But at the same time, 1985 bombing is deliberately forgotten by everyone. Are we to believe that the Western countries are not hand in glove in this? Who are we fooling? Are we to believe that the European agencies are not aware of what Canada is doing? Are we to believe American agencies are not aware of what has happened? Are we to believe that the French, the Germans, the British are not aware? Are we to believe that Trudeau himself is doing it and no one are there behind him who are equally hand in glove? Whose hand is there inside the gloves? That is something that we must introspect. The tragedy is that Canada sends soldiers to fight America's war on terror in Afghanistan, but fails to give justice, forget about Indians, fails to give justice to its own people. It denies justice to its own people. It denies justice to the people of his own country, but pays homage every year to the victims of 9/11. So I think we should first of all show mirror to the West that when you talk about democracy, liberalism, this, that, how hollow you are. Have you ever heard the Western media ever talking about what is being discussed? I am very, very proud of what NewsX has been doing, and I'm proud to be part of it for the last so many months, what has been done. But tell me, are the BBCs of the world not aware of this?
No, why will the BBC ever talk about it?
Why is it that United States or the Western countries never?
The BBC would much rather want to argue about whether Talvinder Parmar was a terrorist or a militant. That's their priority.
They would say he was a plumber. They would say he was a plumber. Now the question is this: why is it that the West never talks about financial action task force to be imposed or the grey listing to be imposed on Canada? Do you think an organization? For the sake of it, I agree to what Ambassador Kapoor stated that they are Canadian terrorists. Are we to believe that the Canadian terrorists could have operated without a very sound financial infrastructure working behind the scene? And that financial infrastructure would not have been successful, could not have been built without the active support of the Canadian intelligence agencies and some others. We know who those others are. The question is this, again, comes back to, do we know this, that most of the resolutions on sanctions that are imposed on terror organizations by United Nations is under the resolution 1267, which is on Al-Qaeda Sanctions Act, which means if you are to be called a terrorist, it's only when you are connected with Al-Qaeda or ISIS, no one else. That is the hollowness of the United Nations definition of terrorism. First of all, they don't even have a definition on terrorism. So let's understand, in 1985, People's Republic of China was not so powerful as it is today. So in 1985 to 2001, if anybody did the handiwork of keeping it under the cover, or still maybe say a decade back, up till decade back, it was all the West. Because then for them, it has always been that, they would be selective in deciding who is a victim of terrorism. Because whenever anything happened in Kashmir, they would call it a gunman. They will not call them terrorists. So frankly, when Pakistan became what it is, there are countries behind Pakistan. So invariably, Canada cannot do it in isolation. I don't think Justin Trudeau is so intelligent. Neither his father was so intelligent. Which means there are other organizations, other countries for whom Canada is the food soldier, the fall guy, the dispensable commodity.
Okay.
And that's why just give me 2 minutes. That's why when we raise these issues, we cannot just presume that it's Justin Trudeau. Justin Trudeau is a dispensable food soldier of somebody else. And let me tell you, this is only going to rise as we march towards becoming a $5 trillion economy. You would see those who are saying that they are strategic partners of India would behind the scene do everything to create civilian unrest within this country. They will not directly do it. They'll keep their hands clean. But they'll do it through another stupid government, which is right now the dispensation in Canada. I have no disrespect for Canada. But the first and most important question to be asked to the people of Canada and the Canadian government, do Canadian lives matter to the government of Canada or not? Or is it that the American lives are more important to the Canadian government, that they pay homage to the victims of 9/11, but not to the victims of the Kanishka bombing? We must start from there, Devika. Then it comes down to Trudeau. Because tomorrow Trudeau will go. I don't think the policy of Canada is going to change drastically.
Okay.
Between his father and him, there were 20 odd years. There were other governments. What strong action did they take? Answer is not much.
Okay, I'm going to bring in Sumit on that note. Sumit, I'm just going to pick up on a point that Pathikrit raised, and we also have some information regarding that. There was a survey that was conducted in Canada just this year, all right? And it says 9 in 10 Canadians know little or nothing about the Kanishka bombing. 61% Canadians have little knowledge of Kanishka bombings. 58% of Canadians below 35 years of age have absolutely no knowledge. 4 in 5 can't correctly identify the Air India blast as the worst act of terrorism on Canadian soil. This is a survey that was done just this year by an agency. Do all the factors then, the pre-bombing and the post-bombing, somewhere indicate that there was just a major effort to completely brush this under the carpet?
Devika ji, thanks for having me on your show. Well, what the numbers indicate, mathematics is the most accurate science. This appears to be true, and this is what the truth is. Because the problem is that Canadians, if you look by the design, when these people kind of got into Canada, what did they do? First of all, they got hold of locals, snatched their children from them, told them, we'll teach you English values, we'll teach you Western values. And they were put in those, what we call as today, those education of the boarding schools. And incidentally in Canada, we have found mass graves of kids from 2 years to 6 years of age. 1,000, 4,000, 5,000, multiple mass graves are found. Girls were sexually abused, they were tortured, they were bonded labor, everything and anything was done with them. And when the native aborigines, or the natives of the land, sorry not to use the word aborigines, when they tried to resist, they sent in the cavalry. They sent the cavalry to tackle them. What happens when the Sikhs who built Canada on their, sweat and blood, when they did a strike, they call the emergency, they call in the cavalry again, they freeze their bank accounts, and this Jagmeet Singh calls them terrorists. So this duplicity of Canada with its people has been very clear. Canada is run by few people for their vested interests. Today, when Karima Baloch is killed, nobody is caught. Ripu Daman Singh is killed, nobody is caught. A plumber with the AK-47 on a no-fly list becomes a problem of the diplomatic relations between India and Canada. Well, it is not in isolation. I agree with Pratikit when he says these people are not agreeing, acting in isolation. There are people who are motivated interests, and this has been the line from very beginning. How come the biggest terrorist attack in last 5 decades before 9/11 was shelved? How come these people were never put to task? And how come, you see, the beauty of the system is that they are not only protecting Khalistanis, now Khalistanis have managed to infiltrate the government. This is the only country in the world where Khalistanis have managed to infiltrate the government. And your prime minister is hand in glove with Khalistanis. You have a Khalistani defense minister, you have Jagmeet Singh on which the government runs. So this kind of a dangerous situation wherein terrorists and terrorist supporters are part of government, wherein for a plumber with AK-47 becomes a issue of a diplomatic row with the world's largest democracy, wherein the prime minister is so compelled, is in so much of majburi that he has to go and defend a terrorist, wherein prime minister is so compelled that he calls some king of Jordan and tells him, look, Bharat mere saath kya kar raha? I don't know what the king of Jordan can move a brick in India or not, but he calls them. He is calling everybody and everybody. And when in the top of this Middle East crisis, he goes to a mosque. What happens in the mosque? The Prime Minister of Canada is booed in a mosque for not supporting Hamas, which is again a terrorist organization, because the Muslims are saying, bhai, if you are supporting Khalistanis, they are terrorists, why not Hamas? Hamas and Khalistanis, they are the, two sides of the same coin. If you have sympathy and empathy for Khalistanis, why not for Hamas? If you are trying to keep some Sikhs happy by supporting Khalistanis, why we are Muslims? Why you are not keeping us happy by supporting Hamas? Now, anything and everything what could go wrong in a country has gone wrong. You have a prime minister who has misplaced priorities. You have a prime minister and all the political leadership who don't want to talk about them. I am very sure if you talk to them about the word Kanishka, they will think it's something to do with India. I can bet you if somebody does a survey, 99% of Canadians will do something to do with India. This is the reality of the things. I mean, you can send your soldiers here, you can send your soldiers there. But if you look at this Middle East fiasco, what is the position of Canada? What is Canada going to do? Canada is caught between Khalistanis and Pakistanis and between the supporters of Hamas. They are circulating between them. And the pendulum who is circulating, his name is Jaswinder Singh Trudeau. Sorry to be a bit sarcastic. That is what the reality is. This country has misplaced priorities, ma'am. They are nothing except they are the neighbor of the United States of America. This country, only 10% of the land is inhabitable, 90% is empty. If you have so much of empathy and sympathy for all those, why don't you make one Chota Palestine? Why don't you make one Chota Khalistan? Now, all these terrorist organizations, you have 90% of the land which is unoccupied, distributed to them, show them unity and diversity, become the united colors of Benetton. This is what this country is about. The world should start asking them why you have been harboring terror and terrorists for decades. How come terrorists have infiltrated your government? How come Canadian democracy is literally running on the clutches of a Khalistani? This Khalistani element decides who comes to power, who doesn't come to power. You see how divided the society is. And these ghettos, these informals are controlling the shots. Isn't it right to say that Chinese are controlling your real estate? Will it be wrong to say that ISI can act at will in Toronto? So Islamabad, Dubai and Toronto, ISI can act on will. So this is what has happened. CIA acts on will, ISI acts on will, Chinese act on will. But I don't know what the Canadian and the Canadian police is doing. I think they're the only ones who are missing in the game. They're the only ones who are the prince of the lost paradise.
Honestly, all of us know nobody's going to ask Canada anything. None of the Western nations will ever ask any questions of Canada. They'll never even... it's just not an issue for them. So they're not going to ask. And like I said, we're trying to do our bit by asking the questions that we feel need to be asked. Let me bring in Mr. Surendra Lali also into the conversation. Mr. Lali, I'd just like to understand from you. Like I said, 30 years ago, it was the biggest terror attack in the world, okay, up until 9/11. 268 lives were Canadian lives, and a total of 329 people died. And that also accounts for another blast that actually took place in Tokyo at the Narita Airport, pardon me. 30 years later, in Canada, the Angus Reid Institute conducts a survey. And 9 out of 10 Canadians say that they know little or nothing about the Kanishka bombing. What does that tell you about the intentions of the Canadian government?
Root racism. Devika, I was 15 years old, and 4 houses away from us was a very senior elderly couple. God bless their soul; they are not in this world anymore, and they lost their real brother and his wife in the Kanishka bombing. And I remember my father came back from the prayer meeting and he said that I feel guilty wearing a turban. Now, from 85 to now, if this has sat on my conscience, then I think there has to be closure to this. Because a lot of people are living with this question mark on their head. And people who have lost their loved and dear ones. So I think a closure has to be brought in. And as you said that, yes, Canada will not the race, but we will race. We have a very nimble and a deft foreign minister pretty much in the Ukraine and the tug of war between the United States and Russia. We took a stand. We said, we're not going to inherit your problems. I mean, you have your own issues to sort out with. You create your own issues and then you want us to react or take sides. I'm sorry, this is not the India anymore. We will not take it lying down because both, the foreign minister and Mr. Hardeep Puri was on record. I was in New York that day when they said that, sorry, we will not factor in your problems because we have our own country, we have our own issues, and we have our own self-respect now. So we will not be in either this side or this side. We're not an ally, we're a strategic partner. That's what happened at G20, G22. And the other thing why I want there should be a closure to this or any criminal offense and of this kind is because then the right precedent is set, because then you can't, then the people at the job can't take it lightly because if, the perpetrators are brought to book, it sets the precedent all across. Whosoever after that comes in, that no, we will be booked. I mean, Ujjal Basanj was a premier of, British Columbia, and he was also an health minister, and he's on record saying that at that time RCMP and CSIS had every information. And, they knew when the trial blast was done, which you just said, but they took it so lightly. I mean, he says that they were probably saying that this is a brown problem, blue turbans fighting with green turbans and green turbans fighting. I mean, that's how they took. And, for the alleged bogey that this Trudeau Jr. keeps to be, shouting from treetops is, I mean, if that's the criteria, then I want to ask for your channel to Justin Trudeau. Where was Bin Laden killed? Is that part of Canadian soil? Or where was Qasem Soleimani killed? Is that part of Canadian soil? What moral right does he have to come without evidence, make a fool out of his country? I mean, he's the laughing stock of his own country. I think he's the biggest comic stand-up comedian in his own country, where he's getting lambasted from not taking sides for either Hamas or Israel. Or, the Chinese premier almost dealt with him as if he's some sort of a, kindergarten child, which is on record in the G20 meeting. And I think even on the September 11, I mean, they again are the American allies, and they pretty much toe the line. Air India had Canadian citizen on it. There were 329 people, out of which 300 were Canadian citizens. For Christ's sake, have a conscience. And if you still don't have a conscience, I'll give you another reason to have a conscience. There were 84 children in that flight. So how can this this level of duplicity, this man who thinks he can wear a swanky suit and come into parliament and just open his mouth and ruin a relation between two G7, G20 countries and two democracies, two trade partners. I mean, there is a lot which he's put for stake more than us. It is the Frankenstein's monster he has created on his own soil, which he'll have to deal with it. I mean, I was hearing the foreign minister this morning also. I mean, they're no less than the deep state. I'm sorry, I'm now compelled to say, because the way, in the Chandigarh Council, they've been granting visas to, I believe in dignity of labor, but so much so for a plumber. I mean, please excuse me. I mean, then what else are you telling children? Not to go to NASA and become a plumber? I mean, a plumber who entered Canada, twice his citizenship was rejected. He came under the name of Mr. Sharma. So I think it's about time that now we should rake the issue up, because I don't think we should wait for their conscience to wake up unless there is a change of government. And I really feel bad, because this guy's going to go out of power. I feel bad for the government that's going to come next, because he's leaving a lot of mess for them to clean up.
Absolutely.
And one last thing, before you allow me to leave, that again, there were Khalistani case slogans. I'm sorry to say that. I don't acknowledge that word. So whenever my friends all across the world get those videos of these loud, inconsequential fringes who these countries have brought up purely for their political vested interests, please do not forward their videos, because let's not become a tool in their divisive hate campaign, because we are a very strong country and we can't allow these inconsequential individuals to influence the social fabric of India and Sikhs across the world. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Can I
Very
make
rightly
one small
put.
point?
I'm going to just give the last word to Mr. Sanjay Lazar. Mr. Lazar, and let's put out this photograph on our screens.
Yeah.
As you pointed out, sir, earlier, 329 lives were lost in June 1985 in this very, very tragic incident.
Yes. And
Three
thank
of
you.
those lives were your family members.
Yes.
There is today a survey that has been conducted in which it has been found that 9 out of 10 Canadians know little or absolutely nothing about the Kanishka bombing, the worst terror attack that has taken place on Canadian soil. Canada, clearly there has been some sort of a deliberate attempt to ensure that the world forgets, that everybody forgets. When we talk about major terror attacks in the world, nobody in fact includes Kanishka bombing in the list. 9/11 would be at the top. I don't remember the last time Kanishka bombing was on any major list. I want to understand from you, leaving the last word with you, since Canada has for the past 30 years made an effort to ensure that the world forgets, how do we now ensure that the world remembers?
Thank you, Devika, and thank you to your channel, and of course the panelists. And I thank Ambassador also for his words and the others. First of all, is we have to, awaken people's memories. Towards that end, let me just tell you that I've done a book which is on Angel's Wings, which deals with how I dealt with the tragedy, and it's a trilogy. It deals with the entire secessionist movement that started in Punjab and is now in BC, and it's called The Blood of Angels, which was released at the end of this year. It deals with the assassination of Mrs. Gandhi. It deals with the bombing, the plot. I go page by page. I've written 2.5 lakh words, and I've gone through research. I've spoken to consular officials, RCMPs. So this truth has to be out there. We need to spread the word and tell people that, it was the worst aviation act of terror before 9/11, yes. Even today, it's the worst aviation disaster on earth. There has not been an aviation act of terrorism, bombing, that has claimed 331 lives. You've had 9/11 was aircrafts flying into a building. The worst bombing ever is where I lost my entire family. And that is, I was a kid then. And I'm now started talking to lots of old Air India families, consular officials, policemen, RCMP, people who were there so that their story doesn't get lost. We're going through a generational change. And Devika, you pointed out rightly the Canadian survey. I'd also like to, point out that there was, there is also a certain amount of I would say memory lapse, but people in India have also forgotten until Justin Trudeau did us the favor. By talking about the plumber, Justin Trudeau has brought the entire Kanishka issue back into focus. And that's the most remarkable thing he could have done. So, yes, I believe that, we need to spread awareness. We need to bring, knowledge, and we need to, if possible, explore all the avenues of mistakes that were made, and let's make sure that this never happens again anywhere. That's what it is. And I'd like to thank all the panelists and your channel, of course, especially.
Absolutely, Mr. Lazar. We would like to thank you because you bring us some, the first-hand perspective that we would never get just by simply reading the reports. So your voice becomes extremely crucial, even for all the panelists and all the viewers who are watching us. On that note, I also thank, of course, everybody for joining us once again as we now demand that the Kanishka files must be reopened for us to understand how dubiously the Canadian government and the Canadian agencies have worked in the past, and perhaps that will help shed light on the allegations that have been made by India today.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.